Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't see you.
I live on about 2,000 acres of farmland in southern Michigan, with scattered wooded areas all around. When I was younger, around 12 to 15, I loved the art of bushcraft, simply building forts, fires, and hanging out in the woods. I never feared anything out there because I had nothing to fear, but somehow, that seemed to have changed overnight. I suddenly felt watched or followed whenever I went out in the woods after school or on the weekends. I'd look over my shoulder every 5 seconds, it felt like. The last time I ever remember playing in the woods, I mustered up the courage to go out and just have fun, build a new fort, start a fire and toast some bread, and warm up a can of chili and go home, which was in sight but about a half-mile walk through the recently harvested fields. The feeling of being watched subsided, but with that came an overwhelming feeling that I was being stalked. I tried rationalizing that it's common to feel that way in the woods with the wildlife and all. I decided to start a fire just to get it going for when it was time to eat. I tried not to venture far for fallen trees and brush. I started setting up my camp. Sitting on a fallen tree while cutting a groove into a large branch to make it fit easier on another, I started hearing what sounded like scratching on a tree. I looked up from my task into the thick tree line, and with branches full of leaves I couldn't see anything, so I thought it was a raccoon digging its new home in a stump. My camp was nearly complete in the early evening. I just needed to throw brush on the top and I'd go home after I eat. I heard the scratching again as soon as I tried opening my can of chili, and through the thick pine branches, about 20 to 25 yards, I saw a dark-haired thing reaching around the tree, hiding everything but its right arm and half of its face, which looked human but also like a dog, white in its eyes with what looked like a grin on its face. I don't think I've ever moved as fast as I did in that moment, throwing dirt that was next to the fire on it and booking it into the field, leaving behind my food and my bag of tools and such. Before making the half-mile run home, I have no idea what possessed me to look back into the trees, but I saw this creature doing the same thing to a tree on the tree line. Same distance between us. Only thing different from last time is that though I could only see half its face, whatever it was, it looked pissed, slowly hiding completely behind the tree. I took off for home, not stopping the entire run. To my knowledge, my little bag with my tools in it are still in those woods. It's been nearly 10 years since it happened, but I still refuse to go back into that specific wooded area, as it's the densest and largest one on the property. I've always been one to take the long way home from wherever I'm coming from, back roads or take the highway a little out of the ways. I like driving, especially at night. Heat turned up, soft chill music, and the night sky to relax me from my busy social life. In 2021, I drove around 45 minutes to see my friends about twice a week. I'd never stay the night. I'd just stay late and take the drive home around 2, 3, sometimes 4 a.m. When it comes to driving, I'm wide awake. My music and thoughts keep me awake. I don't drive if I'm the slightest bit tired. Anyone from South and Southeastern Michigan can tell you the weather in early 2021 was nasty. Cold, wet, and thick snow and ice, like Mother Nature said, I told you I could. Despite these conditions, I still went and visited these friends. so I carefully drive to and from wherever I went to see them. With these conditions came an alternate route to get home to avoid most traffic. Not like there was any most of the time, but to be even more safe. It required me taking the highway about 10 to 15 more minutes west into a small city, getting off and cutting through the downtown area onto the old US highway. Just a simple main road. Tacked on about an extra 15 to 20 minutes sometimes. But I was never in a rush, and this was safer. I took this route from then until my friends moved away, so about 3 to 4 months. It was relaxing until one night, towards the time my friends moved away, I was about 8 to 10 minutes away from home. Along this main road, there were obviously back roads that came into an intersection where I have the right of way or the sideways T for the back road to enter the main road. In this case, it was like a hidden driveway because a thick tree line was just 5 feet off the shoulder on the road. This road led over a highway, around a lake, and back over to the main road I was in. I started experiencing a feeling of confusion and kind of like dread when I started approaching this road. Even though I drive by it and don't have to turn into it, I still felt scared, in a sense, to come across it. And that feeling would suddenly stop as soon as I passed it and went over the hill. One night I was doing my regular long way home drive, and I got the feeling again. I could chalk these experiences up to sleep deprivation and hallucinations of exhaustion. But I don't ever remember being tired enough to feel that way. That's when I noticed the same creature I saw when I was younger, playing in the woods, was hiding behind a tree 5 feet off the shoulder, eyeing me down with half its face behind the tree and its right arm wrapped around the trunk. The snow on the ground and clear moonlit sky made it clearly visible. This wasn't a small critter crawling up the tree or someone messing with me. This was the dog humanoid-like creature I saw when I was younger. I probably went 80 miles per hour all the way home despite the ice after seeing that, running straight out of my car into the house and into my room. This happened another 3 to 4 times on different trees along that tree line, until I stopped taking that way home. It's a normal route for me now during the day, but I always try avoiding it at night now, until just last year, at the end of summer. In the summer of 2022, I'd visit a different friend in said town I'd cut through to make it home from my other friends in Story 2. She lived right off the highway exit I'd take in Story 2. Just a left to her place, rather than originally going right to cut through downtown and home. I almost forgot about my previous experiences. I'd stay the night at this friend's place and go home around 5 to 6 a.m. And I'd take that same back road home because it's the only main one, and the highway I had to take south to home was too far out of the way. Plus, I would be well rested, enough so to watch out for deer. I never experienced that creature on the shoulder of the road again, since 2021, but I told myself it was all sleep deprivation, and I never get that feeling anymore, so I was obviously hallucinating. To prove it to myself one morning, I'd take that road where that creature would hide in the tree line on the shoulder, and would wrap around the lake and back to the main road just to prove to myself that it was all hallucinating or just scaring myself. After taking the right turn down the side road and going over the highway and around a bend, you're met with a hilly dirt road that's meant for 2 cars to go down, but only feels like 1 car can. Trees hug both sides of the road and over it like a canopy, with about 3 houses scattered down the right side, one about every half mile on a 1.5 to 2 mile road. So, a not very populated back road. I made my way down the road, feeling hard-headed and relaxed. I made it about 2/3 of the way. I can see the stop sign I'm supposed to take a left at, that leads back to the main road with the final ranch-style home on my right. and the thick trees stop into individually spaced out trees every 10 feet. The last tree before the thick tree line started back up, I saw those damn glowing white eyes behind the trunk of the tree. Involuntarily, pressing my gas pedal faster and faster, this thing, this tormenting beast, just eyes me down, turning to continuously stay hidden, showing nothing but its face. My headlights are LED, so I got the best look possible, especially with dawn's sunlight peeking out through the trees right on it. Dog-like is the best way I can describe it, with humanoid-like capabilities, as to stand on 2 feet and maneuver around a tree like that so smoothly. I don't know what this thing is, but from what I've listened to and researched, as I'm a big paranormal and cryptid fan, I've come to the conclusion that it's a hide-behind. I haven't told these stories to anyone, as to ruin people's perspective of me like I'm crazy. I rationalize it with the belief that I could be hallucinating, but that just seems like more of an excuse now that I've seen it with my own well-rested eyes in the early morning. It's almost like it's stalked me all of these years, and though I haven't seen it in over a year, I like to think that it's done with me. Or does that just mean I'm overdue for another encounter? I've always enjoyed solo camping trips. There's something incredibly freeing about being alone in nature, with only the sounds of the forest for company. Last summer, I decided to venture into the remote woods of northern Minnesota for a few days of solitude and reflection. The first couple of days were great. The weather was perfect, and I spent my time hiking, fishing, and relaxing by the campfire. The isolation was exactly what I needed to clear my mind and recharge. But on the third day, something happened that I still can't quite explain. I'd set up my camp near a small clearing, with my tent nestled between a few large trees. As evening began to fall, I realized I needed more firewood to keep the campfire going through the night. I grabbed my hatchet and ventured a bit further into the forest to gather some wood. As I walked, I felt a slight unease, but chalked it up to the natural eeriness of the forest at dusk. The shadows were growing longer, and the forest seemed to grow quieter with each step I took. I kept an eye out for suitable branches and downed trees, focused on my task. That's when I first saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a shadowy figure seemed to flit behind a tree. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. I laughed nervously to myself, dismissing it as a trick of the light or my imagination playing with the changing shadows. I continued deeper into the woods, collecting a decent pile of firewood. As I bent down to pick up another piece, I heard the distinct snap of a twig. I stood up and scanned the area. About 30 feet away, almost entirely obscured by the trees, was part of a dark figure. When I say part, I mean only half a face and one of its long arms. It was tall, with long, thin limbs that seemed to blend seamlessly with the shadows cast by the trees. It just stood there, watching me. My heart raced. I tried to convince myself that it was just a product of my mind playing tricks in the fading light. But every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. I stepped back slowly, never taking my eyes off the figure. As I moved, it mirrored my actions, staying hidden behind the thick tree trunks. I quickly gathered my firewood and started the trek back to my campsite, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. But every few steps I would glance back and catch a glimpse of the figure following me, always just out of clear view, always just half of its face peering from behind a tree. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, and I was the prey. By the time I reached my campsite, the light had almost completely faded. I hastily got the fire going again, the comforting flames casting long shadows around my camp. I hoped the fire would deter whatever it was. But the feeling of being watched never faded. That night I barely slept. Every crackle of the fire and rustle of the leaves outside my tent kept me on edge. I clutched my hatchet tightly, ready for anything. At some point during the night, I thought I heard footsteps just outside of my tent. But when I listened harder, there was nothing but the sound of the wind in the trees. The next morning, I wasted no time packing up my campsite. The sense of dread from the previous night still clung to me, urging me to leave. As I was making my way back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, though I saw no sign of the figure again. It wasn't until years later, while drinking one night and sharing creepy camping stories with my friends, that one of them mentioned the legend of the Hidebehind. According to folklore, it's a creature that stalks and preys on people in the woods, always staying just out of clear sight. The description matched my experience perfectly. Had I been stalked by a hide-behind that night in the Minnesota woods? To this day, I can't be sure, but I often find myself thinking back to those eerie moments, wondering if there's some truth to the old legends. When I was 11 years old, my family decided to rent a secluded cabin in the woods of Wisconsin for our summer vacation. The idea was to disconnect from our busy lives and spend some quality time together in nature. We'd go fishing, hiking, and just enjoy the tranquility of the great outdoors. On the surface, the cabin was perfect. It was quaint, cozy, and surrounded by dense woods. The first few days were a dream. My parents and I would venture into the woods during the day, and in the evenings, we would sit by the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. However, things started to change about halfway through our stay. It began with fleeting shadows. I'd be playing outside or gazing out the cabin window when I'd catch a glimpse of something dark and tall darting behind a tree. The first few times I thought it was just my imagination. I was a kid after all. But it wasn't just me. My mum mentioned seeing something strange too. She would catch what she described as a tall shadow moving swiftly through the trees, always just out of sight. My dad dismissed it as wildlife, probably a deer or some other animal native to the area. One evening, while my parents were inside preparing dinner, I decided to explore a bit deeper into the woods. I wasn't too far from the cabin when I heard a twig snap. Startled, I looked around and saw it, a dark figure peeking from behind a tree. It was thin, with long limbs, mostly hidden by shadows. I froze. The figure seemed to be watching me. My heart was racing and I could barely breathe. Then, in an instant, it slipped behind the tree, out of sight. Terrified, I ran back to the cabin as fast as my legs could carry me. I burst inside, trying to explain to my parents what I had seen. They attributed it to my imagination and the creepiness of the woods as it got darker. But I knew what I saw was real. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle outside the cabin made me jump. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. At one point, curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked out the window. My heart nearly stopped. There, at the edge of the clearing, was the figure again. It was closer than before, almost as if it had been slowly inching its way toward the cabin over the past few days. I woke my parents, but by the time they looked, it was gone. Our vacation, which had started with so much joy, became a tense affair. The feeling of being watched grew stronger every day. My mum started seeing those shadows more frequently too. My dad, ever the skeptic, tried to ignore it, but I could see the unease in his eyes. On the last night of our stay, the tension reached its peak. We were gathered in the living room, playing a board game, Monopoly if I recall correctly, trying to distract ourselves, when there was a loud knock on the window. We all jumped. My dad grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the window. There was nothing there. He stepped outside to check, but found no signs of anyone or anything. Reluctantly, we decided to call it a night. I woke up in the middle of the night to an eerie silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I tiptoed to the window and looked out once more. There it was, the dark figure, peering from behind a tree, motionless at the tree line, its hollow eyes seemingly fixed on me. I hurried back to bed and hid under the covers, willing myself to fall asleep and for morning to come quickly. We left the cabin the next day, cutting our vacation short. My parents didn't say much about the strange occurrences, but I knew they felt the same unease I did. Years later, as an adult, I recounted this story to a friend, expecting them to laugh it off as a child's overactive imagination. But instead, their expression grew serious. They told me about a cryptid called a hidebehind, known for lurking in forests and hiding behind trees. Chills ran down my spine. All these years, I had no name for what I saw, but hearing about the hidebehind matched perfectly with the unexplainable shadows and figures I remembered. So I'm left wondering, was it really a hidebehind that haunted our vacation in Wisconsin? What do you think? So my boyfriend, Matt, is an avid hiker. He's been hiking for years and loves the outdoors. Me, not so much. But because I love him and want to share in his interests, I've been trying to get into it. This was only our third hike together, a trip planned from Cadillac to Manistee through the Manistee National Forest. As someone relatively new to hiking, I was looking forward to the scenic views and some quality time with Matt. The first couple of days were amazing. The forest was beautiful, the weather was perfect, and I was starting to see why Matt loved this so much. But by the third day, things took a turn. We were deep in the forest, away from any signs of civilization. It was late afternoon when I first noticed something odd. I kept seeing movements out of the corner of my eye, just fleeting shadows that disappeared the moment I turned to look. I chalked it up to my inexperience and tiredness. But there was this moment when we were taking a break, and I saw it again, a dark figure darting behind a tree. I mentioned it to Matt, and he reassured me that it was probably just an animal, and nothing to worry about. As we continued hiking, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I couldn't shake off the sensation, and the glimpses of the figure became more frequent. At one point, while Matt was adjusting his backpack, I felt compelled to look behind us. That's when I saw what I'm sure was a face peeking out from behind a tree. It was just for a split second, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. That night we set up camp by a small clearing. While Matt was making dinner, I wandered a bit to collect some firewood. That's when I had my first real encounter. I was about 20 feet from our campsite when I heard a twig snap. I turned around and saw it. The same figure, but this time it was closer, peering from behind a tree. I froze. The figure stared at me with hollow, dark eyes. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, paralyzed. Then, just as suddenly, it disappeared behind the tree. I ran back to Matt, breathless and panicked. I told him what I saw, but he tried to calm me down, suggesting it was just a trick of the light or my imagination running wild, but I knew what I saw. That night I hardly slept. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig outside our tent had me on edge. I kept seeing those dark, hollow eyes in my mind. By morning I was exhausted, but I didn't want to ruin the trip for Matt, so I put on a brave face and we continued our hike. That was until our last night in the forest. We had set up camp again, and I stayed close to Matt the entire time. As we settled into the tent, I heard something moving outside. I sat up, listening intently as the noise grew louder. Matt was already asleep, so I quietly unzipped the tent slightly to peek outside. That's when I saw it. The same figure, standing at the edge of the campsite, partially obscured by a tree. It was closer than before, its hollow eyes fixated on our tent. I saw more of it this time. It was tall, thin, and seemed to have elongated limbs. I quickly zipped the tent back up, my heart racing. I shook Matt awake, trying to explain through my fear what I saw. I insisted we needed to leave immediately. Sensing my genuine terror, Matt reluctantly agreed. We hastily packed up and started hiking through the dark, using our flashlights to guide us. I kept looking over my shoulder, dreading the sight of those hollow eyes following us. We hiked non-stop until dawn, when we finally reached the ranger station near Manistee. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as we stepped inside. Despite Matt's reassurances, I couldn't shake off the fear and anxiety. It wasn't until we were safely back home that I allowed myself to relax. When I shared my experience with a friend, they suggested it might have been a hide-behind and told me more about the folklore. I had no idea such a thing even existed until then. Curious and desperate for answers, I started researching online about hide-behinds. According to the website I stumbled upon, it is a creature from American folklore, said to stalk forested areas, hiding behind trees and preying on those who dare to venture too deep into the woods. The description matched perfectly with what I saw. Stay safe out there, folks, and trust your instincts. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added in the new year. Also, I will be adding new designs to the merch store, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.